I-35F exposed my toxic family's true nature at my grandfather's birthday party, causing them to lose their academic reputation. Here's my revenge story. Growing up, I was constantly compared to my older sister Victoria, 38F. She was everything our parents valued: academically gifted, disciplined, and perfect in every way. Victoria had a natural focus that made her seem flawless in their eyes. Meanwhile, I struggled with what I later discovered was ADHD, though back then, I just thought I was lazy or incapable. The diagnosis came much later in life, during my early career. It was a revelation that explained so many of my childhood struggles: the inability to focus during lectures, the constant procrastination, the feeling of being overwhelmed by simple tasks that others seemed to handle effortlessly. With proper medication and support, I finally understood that I wasn't broken or inferior, I just had a different way of processing the world. My parents, Dr. James Anderson, 65M, and Dr. Margaret Anderson, 63F, are highly respected academics at one of Texas's top universities. Dad specializes in quantum physics, and Mom is a renowned researcher in cognitive psychology. Ironically, she's published several papers on childhood development, yet failed to recognize her own daughter's ADHD. They expected nothing but excellence from their children, and Victoria effortlessly met those expectations. I, however, was labeled the troublesome child. No matter how hard I tried, I was never good enough in their eyes. Victoria made my life even harder. At school, she'd publicly berate me for any small mistake, telling everyone how embarrassed she was to have such a loser for a sister. At home, she'd constantly report my smallest infractions to our parents. The time I forgot to do my math homework? She made sure they knew. When I spent an afternoon with friends instead of studying? She'd tell them I was wasting my potential. Despite her obvious social problems, she had no friends due to her condescending attitude. My parents saw her as perfect. The contrast in how they treated us was stark. Victoria's birthdays were extravagant celebrations with themed decorations, catered food, and guests from their academic circle. Mine were barely acknowledged, with a few educational books and a lecture about improving my grades. When she got into a prestigious university, they threw a massive party that seemed more like a coronation. The entire physics and psychology departments were invited, and my parents proudly announced their daughter was following in their footsteps. But when I was accepted into what they considered an average college, my father couldn't even look at me. He said he was too embarrassed to tell relatives where I was going, that I had brought shame to the family name. The night of my acceptance, he called a family meeting. I still remember his exact words: "I have no hopes for you anymore. I want you gone from our lives. Having you as a daughter has been nothing but a disappointment." That was the last straw. I cut all contact with them and focused on building my own life. Despite struggling with undiagnosed ADHD, working part-time jobs, and taking out loans, I managed to graduate with a degree in computer science. The tech world, I discovered, was perfect for my ADHD brain: the fast-paced environment, the constant innovation, the need to think outside the box. Where my parents saw defects, the tech industry saw potential. I started as a junior developer at a small startup in Austin, but my ability to hyper-focus on projects and think creatively quickly got me noticed. Within 3 years, I was leading development teams. Then I started creating content about tech and neurodiversity in the workplace. My posts about ADHD and tech went viral, resonating with thousands who shared similar experiences. Today, I'm a well-known tech influencer in Austin's thriving tech scene, with over 1 million followers across platforms. I've been featured in major tech publications, speak at industry conferences, and run a successful consulting business helping companies create more inclusive workplaces for neurodivergent employees. For 9 years, I built this life without any contact with my family. I avoided all family events, declined wedding invitations, missed funerals, anything to avoid confronting the pain they had caused. Until recently, when my grandfather Robert Bob Anderson, 80M, personally called to invite me to his 80th birthday party. Unlike my parents, Granddad had always shown me kindness. When I was young, he'd defend me during family dinners, telling my parents they were being too harsh. He was the only one who saw me struggling and offered comfort instead of criticism. When I arrived at the party, held at an upscale restaurant in downtown Austin, I first noticed my parents' shocked expressions. My father quickly pulled me aside, his face stern. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. I explained that Granddad had invited me, but my mother interrupted, demanding to know why I'd suddenly decided to show up after years of absence. I told them I had no interest in reconnecting, I was here for my grandfather. My mother argued that my presence would raise too many questions they weren't prepared to answer. When I mentioned my successful career, my father scoffed, "Do you honestly expect us to believe that? You didn't even graduate from a decent college." Then he pointed to the door and coldly said, "You should leave. People can't know you're still a failure." Their dismissive attitude and attempts to control me, even after all these years, made something snap inside me. Looking at them, I saw not the intimidating figures of my childhood, but two people so obsessed with their reputation that they'd sacrifice their own daughter to maintain it. If they were so worried about their image, I decided to show everyone exactly who they really were. My social media influence had taught me the power of public exposure. I knew how quickly reputations could crumble when the truth came to light, especially in academic circles where reputation is everything. As I watched my parents smugly return to the party, confident they'd silence me once again, I began formulating a plan. My grandfather noticed my distress and came to check on me. After hearing what had happened, he didn't just support my decision to address everyone publicly, he encouraged it. "It's time," he said, squeezing my hand. "They can't hide behind their reputation forever." I clinked my glass to get attention, and the room fell silent. The gathered guests, a mix of family members, academic colleagues, and family friends, all turned to look at me. I saw my parents' faces change from confusion to horror as they realized what I was about to do. I started by congratulating my grandfather and thanking him for inviting me. Then I revealed the truth about why I'd been absent from family events, how my parents had emotionally abused me throughout my childhood, dismissed my ADHD as laziness, and ultimately disowned me for not meeting their impossible standards. I explained how they had favored Victoria, showering her with love and attention while treating me as a burden. I described paying my own way through college without any support, building a successful career despite their predictions of failure, and how even now, they were trying to force me to leave my own grandfather's birthday party because they were ashamed of me. "I'm done hiding," I declared, my voice growing stronger. "I'm done letting them control the narrative. From now on, I'll be attending every family event, regardless of whether they like it or not. And unlike them, I have nothing to be ashamed of." The room was silent as I spoke. Some relatives exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others stared at my mortified parents. My mother's face had gone white, and my father looked furious. When I finished, my grandfather and cousins came forward to hug me and show their support. Several of Dad's colleagues from the university were present, and I could see them whispering among themselves, looking at my parents with new eyes. My parents, unable to defend themselves now that their true nature was exposed, quickly left the party in embarrassment. I stayed behind, enjoying time with relatives who were finally seeing the truth. But this was just the beginning. I had plans to make sure their carefully crafted academic reputation would never recover from this exposure. After all, I had a platform now, and I knew exactly how to use it. The next morning, I opened my laptop and began typing. The story of two respected professors who emotionally abused their neurodivergent daughter was about to go viral in academic circles. Their precious reputation was about to crumble, and the best part? They had given me all the ammunition I needed at that party. Update 1: After my grandfather's party, I knew I had to act fast. My parents would try to control the narrative, so I needed to make sure my version of events reached the right people first. I crafted a detailed LinkedIn post about growing up as a neurodivergent child in academia, specifically highlighting how two respected professors emotionally abused their ADHD daughter while publicly preaching about educational inclusivity. Without naming names, I described how my mother, a cognitive psychology researcher who specialized in childhood development, failed to recognize clear ADHD symptoms in her own daughter. Instead of support, she chose to label me as lazy and incompetent. I also detailed how my father, despite his prestigious position in physics, believed that academic pedigree was more important than actual ability or innovation. The post resonated far beyond my expectations. Within hours, it went viral in academic circles. Other professors' kids started sharing similar experiences of growing up under immense pressure in academic households. The conversation quickly shifted from my personal story to a broader discussion about toxicity in academia and the treatment of neurodivergent students. Several of my father's colleagues who were at the party began connecting the dots. They had witnessed my speech and now could identify the professors in my post. The whispers started spreading through their department. Some of their graduate students, who followed me on social media, also made the connection and began sharing their own experiences with my parents' elitism. My mother's research on childhood development suddenly came under scrutiny. How could someone who published papers about supporting diverse learning styles completely fail their own child? Her upcoming speaking engagements at education conferences started getting cancelled. Conference organizers cited concerns about alignment with our values of inclusivity. The university's PR department reached out to my parents for comment about the growing controversy. They tried to dismiss it as a private family matter, but their response only made things worse. Their defensive attitude and refusal to acknowledge any wrongdoing just confirmed everything I had written about them. Victoria attempted to do damage control by posting her own version of events, claiming I was exaggerating and seeking attention. However, her post backfired spectacularly. Her condescending tone and obvious lack of empathy only supported my description of her as the entitled golden child. Several of her former classmates commented, sharing stories of how she had bullied them in school. What really sealed their fate was when one of my cousins shared screenshots of old family group chats, showing my parents' dismissive comments about my ADHD diagnosis and their constant comparisons between Victoria and me. These private messages directly contradicted their public stance on educational equality and neurodiversity support. The impact on their professional lives was immediate. My father's research funding came under review. Grant committees suddenly had concerns about his leadership abilities and mentoring capabilities. My mother's latest paper about inclusive education practices was rejected with unusually harsh feedback about authenticity in research. Their colleagues started distancing themselves. Lunch invitations dried up. They were quietly removed from department committees. No one wanted to be associated with professors who preached academic inclusivity while emotionally abusing their own child for being different. The story has even caught the attention of several prominent academic blogs. They're planning to publish articles about the broader implications of elitism and ableism in academia, using my parents' behavior as a case study. Their carefully built academic reputation is crumbling, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. Several relatives have reached out to me expressing their support and commending me for speaking out. Some have apologized for not recognizing what was happening earlier. A few older cousins admitted they had noticed the unfair treatment but were afraid to say anything because of my parents' influence in the family. Surprisingly, some of Victoria's colleagues have contacted me privately. They shared stories of her toxic behavior in their department, suggesting that the same patterns from our childhood have continued in her professional life. Her tenure review is coming up, and these revelations couldn't have come at a worse time for her. The most satisfying part? My parents can't dismiss this as just family drama. Their treatment of me directly contradicts their public personas and published research. Every attempt they make to defend themselves only draws more attention to their hypocrisy. Their professional reputations, which they valued above everything else, are being destroyed by the very academic community they sought to impress. I've received hundreds of messages from other adults with ADHD thanking me for speaking out. Many of them faced similar discrimination in academic settings. We're organizing a symposium about neurodiversity in higher education, and several prominent universities have expressed interest in participating. Watching my parents' carefully constructed academic facade crumble has been incredibly satisfying. They spent years making me feel worthless because I didn't fit their narrow definition of success. Now, the very community they valued so highly is turning against them, and it's all because they couldn't accept their own daughter as she was. The best part? I haven't had to embellish anything. The truth about who they really are was all it took to destroy everything they spent decades building. Sometimes, justice comes in the form of simple exposure. Update 2: Victoria finally snapped. After watching our parents' reputation crumble and feeling her own academic position become increasingly precarious, she launched what she thought would be a devastating counterattack. She wrote a lengthy article for a well-known academic blog, attempting to paint me as a manipulative attention seeker who was twisting the truth for social media fame. Her article detailed how our parents had only pushed us to excel, and how I was just bitter about my own academic failures. She even tried to dismiss my ADHD diagnosis, suggesting I was using it as an excuse for my lack of discipline. The article was exactly what you'd expect from Victoria: condescending, lacking self-awareness, and dripping with academic elitism. What she didn't expect was the response from her own academic community. Her dismissal of ADHD as an excuse sparked outrage among disability rights advocates in academia. Several prominent researchers in neurodiversity studies wrote scathing responses, pointing out how her attitude exemplified the very discrimination they were fighting against. But the real bombshell came from an unexpected source. One of Victoria's former graduate students reached out to me with a treasure trove of emails. These emails showed Victoria systematically bullying and belittling students who required accommodations for ADHD and other learning differences. In one particularly damning exchange, she referred to a student's accommodations request as another excuse from the lazy generation. I didn't even need to expose these emails myself. The former student, now a tenure-track professor at another university, published them on her own professional blog. The post went viral in academic circles, with hundreds of current and former students coming forward with their own stories about Victoria's discriminatory behavior. The timing couldn't have been worse for her. Her university's administration was already under pressure about their handling of neurodiversity issues. They couldn't ignore such clear evidence of discriminatory behavior from a faculty member. Victoria was immediately removed from all committees dealing with student accommodations, and her upcoming tenure review was postponed pending an investigation. Her desperate attempt to defend herself only made things worse. She sent a mass email to her department claiming she was the victim of a coordinated attack by underachieving students who couldn't handle the rigors of academia. This email was quickly leaked and went viral on academic Twitter, leading to calls for her resignation. Meanwhile, my parents tried to salvage what was left of their reputation by throwing Victoria under the bus. They released a statement claiming they were shocked and disappointed by her treatment of students, and that it didn't reflect the values they had tried to instill. This obvious attempt to distance themselves from the scandal backfired spectacularly. People immediately pointed out how their sudden concern for student welfare contradicted their own documented treatment of me. The family dynamics exploded in public view when Victoria, feeling betrayed by our parents, posted a lengthy rant on her professional Facebook page. She detailed how they had pushed her to be perfect, how they had used her achievements to prove their parenting methods were right, and how they were now abandoning her to save themselves. Without meaning to, she confirmed everything I had said about our dysfunctional family dynamic. Their carefully constructed academic dynasty was collapsing like a house of cards. Victoria's tenure review has been indefinitely postponed. Most of her research collaborators have quietly withdrawn from joint projects. Conference organizers who once eagerly sought her participation are now finding reasons to rescind invitations. But the most satisfying development came from an unexpected quarter. The journal that published my mother's most cited paper on childhood development announced they were publishing a special issue on academic ableism. They specifically invited papers examining how academic parents' treatment of their own neurodivergent children reflects broader systemic issues in academia. The irony is delicious: my mother's research is now being used as a case study in academic hypocrisy. Several papers in the upcoming issue directly reference our family situation, analyzing how proclaimed expertise in child development can coexist with harmful parenting practices. Victoria's last desperate move was to threaten legal action against me for defamation. Her lawyer quickly backed down when we demonstrated that everything I'd shared was either documented fact or clearly labeled personal experience. More importantly, Victoria's own public responses had confirmed the essential truth of my statements. The academic community that once celebrated my sister's achievements now views her as a cautionary tale about the toxic culture of academic elitism. Her recent faculty evaluation included concerns about her inability to adapt to modern inclusive teaching practices and concerning patterns in student interactions. Our extended family has completely turned against Victoria and our parents. Even relatives who initially stayed neutral have reached out to express their support for me. Several cousins who work in academia have publicly shared their own stories of how Victoria's arrogance and our parents' elitism affected family dynamics. What makes this victory especially sweet is that I never had to stretch the truth or engage in personal attacks. Victoria and our parents destroyed themselves with their own words and actions. Their responses to being exposed, the defensiveness, the victim blaming, the attempts to discredit me, only served to prove my point about their toxic behavior. The academic community is using our family's story to have broader conversations about ableism, elitism, and toxic achievement culture in academia. Several universities have invited me to speak about my experiences as part of their faculty development programs. I'm working with disability rights advocates to develop guidelines for supporting neurodivergent students in academic families. Victoria's public meltdown and our parents' failed attempts at damage control have transformed what started as a personal story of family dysfunction into a watershed moment for discussions about academic culture. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply giving people enough rope to hang themselves, and my family has done exactly that. Update 3: 4 months have passed since Victoria's meltdown, and the situation has evolved in ways I never expected. The most surprising development came in the form of an email from my mother. She wrote that she's been attending therapy and has spent considerable time reflecting on her actions. In her email, she admitted to reading through my posts about growing up with undiagnosed ADHD. She confessed that as a psychology professor who specialized in childhood development, she should have recognized the signs. She's been doing intensive research about ADHD and now understands how her actions affected me. The most revealing part was her admission about their parenting approach. She explained that both she and Dad came from academically rigorous families where success was measured solely by scholarly achievements. They had unconsciously perpetuated this toxic cycle with Victoria and me, but in different ways, pushing Victoria to unhealthy perfection while dismissing my different way of learning as failure. She mentioned finding my professional profile and following my career achievements from afar. She expressed genuine pride in what I've accomplished, particularly in my advocacy work for neurodiversity in tech. However, I noticed she carefully avoided mentioning the current state of her and Dad's academic careers. The reality is, their professional lives have been permanently altered. Dad has taken early retirement, though encouraged to retire would be more accurate. The university's board was clear, his position had become untenable after multiple graduate students cited our family's story as evidence of systemic discrimination in their department. Mom's research credibility is effectively destroyed. Her papers on inclusive education and childhood development are now routinely cited as examples of the disconnect between academic theory and personal practice. She's been removed from various editorial boards, and her research funding has dried up. Victoria's situation is even more dramatic. After her tenure review was postponed indefinitely, she was offered a graceful exit, a position at a small community college in another state. It's a stunning fall from grace for someone who once looked down on any institution outside the top 20 rankings. The impact has spread beyond our immediate family. The story has become a case study in several universities' ethics and education courses. My parents' behavior is used as an example of how academic expertise doesn't automatically translate to personal wisdom or ethical behavior. What's particularly satisfying is how the academic community has embraced neurodiversity in response to this scandal. Several prestigious universities have established new guidelines for supporting neurodivergent students, explicitly citing our family's story as a catalyst for change. The Symposium on Neurodiversity in Higher Education that I helped organize has become an annual event, drawing participants from universities worldwide. We're developing resources for academic families with neurodivergent children, ensuring that future generations don't face the same discrimination I did. Despite Mom's apology, I haven't unblocked her or Dad's numbers. Dad, true to his proud nature, still hasn't attempted to contact me. According to relatives, he maintains that pushing us academically was for our own good, and refuses to acknowledge any wrongdoing. I've started attending family events regularly now. The dynamic has completely shifted. Where once my parents dominated these gatherings with tales of Victoria's achievements, now they rarely attend. When they do show up, they keep to themselves, barely acknowledged by relatives who once hung on their every word. Victoria has essentially disappeared from family life. She declined our cousin's wedding invitation, citing professional commitments at her new college. The family grapevine suggests she's struggling to adjust to life without the prestige she once took for granted. My grandfather recently told me something interesting. He said that watching my success has made him realize that traditional academic achievement isn't the only path to a meaningful life. He's proud that I've not only succeeded on my own terms but have helped create positive change for others like me. The most meaningful outcome isn't the destruction of my family's reputation, it's the conversations this has started about neurodiversity, academic pressure, and family dynamics. We're creating real change in how academic institutions approach neurodivergent students and how academic parents treat their children. As for me, I've found a strange sense of peace. The anger that drove my initial exposure has transformed into determination to create positive change. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't just exposing the truth, it's using that truth to prevent others from experiencing the same pain you did.